Now, I want to address 5 things that I think are important about music theory and why, as a metal musician, you should know about them. The first part I want to address is engaging with session musicians. Now, maybe as a band member, things don't necessarily need to be discussed on a very technical level when it comes to music theory, although you may talk to your band members on how to play a certain part. And actually, in a way, you are using music theory to explain that. Types of chords, types of melodic runs, and all this kind of stuff. But when you are addressing another musician, and this person you might hire for, let's say, an album you're working on that's your solo project, something that I've done quite a bit, you have to be able to communicate to them in a way that they understand how to approach your music on a technical level, especially if they've never worked with you before. In this case, you may need to provide sheet music, or you need to provide tabs. And if that's the case, you need to write it. So learning music theory allows you to effectively communicate how to play a performance for someone who hasn't heard it before. So session musicians, when they're in the studio, especially, and you're paying for that time, especially, you want to make sure that you're as efficient as possible. Because in this case, time is money, right? So if you know a little bit about theory, it can go a long way, especially talking about, the bass is playing this part. And the guitar, it seems to be muddying up the sound because maybe you're using the wrong inversion of a chord. Something as simple as that. So think about that, because when you are going to communicate to other musicians about your music, or if you are coming in to learn somebody else's music, note that music theory could be a really useful tool to getting to knowing that song faster. That's point number 1. Point number 2, which is a little bit of a tag on to this, is actually learning how to orchestrate a music piece. So what do I mean when I say that? Arranging, instrumentation, layering sounds, and all this kind of stuff that as an audio engineer I do in the mix, but as a performer and musician, you actually can learn something from olden times, ye olden times, about orchestration. One of the things is, why are there certain instruments in the orchestra? Well, bear with me for a second, because there's a point to this. Composers back in the day had to learn how every single instrument sounded, because each instrument has something called timbre. And that timbre is different, right? If you're going to play an oboe versus a clarinet versus a violin or a flute or something of that sort, you're going to hear the differences in the color of that sound. Now, because we didn't have mixing consoles back during the time of Bach, they had to choose the right instrument for the right part. That's something that you can learn and appropriate with music theory. Because if I'm working with something, let's say symphonic metal, which is a popular genre that we do in metal. If I'm doing symphonic metal, whether I choose to stack my strings, I want to make sure that those strings sound really, really wide and open. They sound best when they're that way. If I bring them too close together, they sound a little bit all muddled and jumbled. However, when we're talking about brass sounds really great when you put them all together rather than far apart. They sound a little bit discombobulated. So a little bit goes a long way in this stuff, because now I can come into writing a piece of music with some knowledge and ammunition. And that ammunition can tackle what I'm trying to get at even faster, right? So learning that skill of being able to arrange or orchestrate in this case, or even if it's just as simple as electric guitars, bass, and drums and vocals, you might be thinking, how do I make guitar 1 fill in a void that guitar 2 can't do, right? Maybe they're doing harmonies, which, let's get into point 3, creating melodies and harmonic contrapuntal works. So when we get into that, first, let's talk about melody. If you're going about melody, you can learn everything about how non-harmonic tones can transition between chords and stuff like that. That's all really nice to know. However, what's more interesting is diving into how do all of these examples of scales and modes and what is a mode, how do those things influence the style that we're going for? There's a couple of really cool modes out there, and modes are basically just variations of a scale. You're choosing a different starting point on that scale. And if we're going into that direction, modes can help create flavors in a scale that we wouldn't otherwise use. You might be familiar with major and minor. Those are very common. And we also have other things like harmonic minor and melodic minor. Those are other types of flavors of minor too. But you ever use Phrygian dominant, the Byzantine, folklorish Lydian? I mean, there's like so much that you can get by just using different types of modes in order to create a different atmosphere in your music. And that, combined with chord progressions, which, number 4, okay, that's going to get you into developing a more sophisticated and call it more mature type of music creation. When you use modes and chords and you are starting to understand how they blend into each other by using tools like the circle of fifths, which is also part of music theory, you are able to now create almost a roadmap automatically for yourself on how music can flow. It's such an amazing tool. And I'm telling you, music is not made by analysis. Music is made through the heart and soul. So you always start with intuition. Tap into that intuition to really create this musical idea that you have. But when you are starting to create music with chord progressions and you're thinking about how does this music move, and you're thinking about, oh, maybe if I use the same chord, but if I use a different inversion and I go in from that inversion into another adaptation that bridges and modulates between key signatures, man, that's kind of powerful, is it not? Simple things that can create complex, sophisticated music. And if you're one who's considered an intellectual with this kind of stuff, I'm sure you would love this. Which, the most important thing, which has helped me as a musician all my life, is transcription, the final part, and analysis of the works that you love, right? Because as musicians, when we start out, we're all about trying to emulate our heroes, are we not? There are certain things that you can learn from them, but you could try it by ear, but have you ever tried transcribing it on paper to see that how they actually did it, or trying to read somebody's transcription? Man, that's a really, really important skill. A long time ago, I used to work on a really awesome fan project for remaking Zelda music. And I was just a big fan of The Legend of Zelda as a kid. It's called Zelda Reorchestrated. And when I was working on that project, I learned so much about orchestration and how to listen and how to interpret notes, how to interpret harmony. These are all things that only happen by my efforts of learning to transcribe. And you walk away with that just having a deeper understanding of what are the elements that go into making this piece of music. And if you attribute that to metal, you can learn not only how are they writing this stuff, but maybe what kind of tunings affect the timbre by using those strings. There's a difference in playing an E on one string versus another string. One's going to have a thicker tone because it's a thicker string. And those types of differences are really important if you want to get a certain vibe across. So you want to really think about that. I hope that this was really helpful for you. Those are 5 things that you can do as a metal musician to learn more about music theory. If you're interested in learning more on a deep dive level, I've got a course on metalmastermind.com. It's called Metal Music Theory. It's a great course that we actually just upgraded for all you guitar lovers. We hope that this satisfies your craving to learn more about how to apply metal music theory to metal guitar. So with that, I'll leave you to your devices. Go out there and just remember to create your own sound.